my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, you guys. Welcome to the conference. It's an honor to be on this panel with you guys. So I guess I'll just get started. My name is Cienna Benn, and I'm a recent alumna of Howard University and a first-year doctoral student at UCI in the Visual Studies Department. And I participated in the UCI HBCU Pathways program this summer. And my presentation this morning is entitled Mumia the Human Being, Black Digital Humanities and the Inheritance of Archival Care. So this project was inspired by my time with the activist Studio West this summer. And this is where we worked to build a digital repository for the campaign to bring Mumia home. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a 67-year-old activist, journalist, and political prisoner who was falsely convicted for the murder of a police officer in 1982 and has since been the lifeblood of contemporary movements against police brutality and abolition ever since. So guided by our digital expert and phenomenal Black feminist scholar, Ella Turin, we spent time doing things like organizing the metadata of this campaign and creating finding aids to rehouse it and publish it as a digital repository. Some of the driving questions for my research for this archive included: how do we center care in the archival process? How can we connect the academy to people and vice versa to reflect movement strategies? And how can we humanize Mumia in the archive? So each of these questions led me to their respective theoretical underpinnings and specific methodologies. In order to address these questions, I just wanted to focus on the fact that we can't regurgitate Eurocentric systems of archiving. So I wanted to know what these questions would lead me to instead. So in my thesis, I explored the fact that we have to contribute to the movements and analyze the collections as living artifacts to be dealt with critically and intimately as our histories and memories. So I assert that Eurocentric archival approaches are rectified through the use of Black digital humanities, enabling us to engage with the campaign to bring Mumia home through a lens of Black feminist thought and to adopt methodologies of intimate archival care beyond politically corrective measures. So this notion of archival care is largely influenced by the ontologies of our program. And one of the frameworks that we looked to was the Combahee River Collective. This was a Black feminist lesbian socialist organization based in Boston from 1974 to 1980. And they're most known for developing the Combahee River Collective Statement, which is a key document that's informed a lot of contemporary Black feminist thought and practice. And in their document, they describe what it means to be both the material and means of preservation, and developed a group model that centers grounding and communal love and support that we leaned on really principally throughout our time this summer. And Patricia Hill Collins is another interlocutor that we looked at this summer. Collins' Black feminist epistemology informs us that the ethics of care are another framework that we leaned on, as the value placed on individual expression, emotional propriety, and the capacity for empathy resemble the essential feminist principles that guide us. So the individual lived experiences of each of us that we all brought to ASW is shown through our own epistemological approach to treating the archive as a living artifact. So this was really our motivation for the archive as something that could be more easily used and accessed through digital humanities. In her article, digital humanities scholar and Africana studies professor Kim Gallen states that humanity is contingent. She explains that the very concept of humanity that we engage with is a contingency and not neutral in the humanities or in the digital world. But not interrogating this notion allows hierarchies to be reinscribed. So Gallen found that digital recovery projects that are either led by or heavily involve Black scholars are particularly powerful in how they expand what we understand digital humanities to be and its potential for critically thinking about power. So while DH exclusively developed by white scholars and IT staff often reflect the racial hierarchies that we see in higher education, this is where she sees Black digital humanities as veering off that path. So she calls it a technology of recovery. And just as Black Studies asks and illuminates to us how non-white subjects are systematically shut out from the category of human as it's performed in the West, digital humanities gives us the tools to be corrected in that. So it's not just an opportunity to contribute to the computations of human modalities in the digital space, but a chance to explore the humanity of marginalized groups through the use of digital tools and methodologies. So in essence, recovery restores Black people's humanity. Black digital humanities prompts us to consider how the foundations of humanities are racialized through the privileging of Western culture as well, to assess, and also to assess how those tools have been applied to that extent. So basically, in order to reimagine their potential and build something new, like a digital repository of radical movement materials, we have to engage with Black digital humanities. So even further in methodology, a methodology that I applied for my research to this extent was inspired by the development of the Claudia Jones Project. This project was developed by my mentor, Farah Rahman at University of Pennsylvania as a multimodal exercise to reflect on and interpret the life and legacy of the Trinidadian Marxist and cultural worker, Claudia Jones. Through her archival presence, and this summer, we curated a group of about 20 people to consider the writings, manifestos, personal correspondence, love letters, and more of Claudia Jones, supplemented with care kits and workshops and guided by external practitioners about craft and performance in the archive. So in taking up Cydia Hartman's notion of critical fabulation, she takes a relational approach to multimodal research against the violence of archival silences that seek to delimit the personhood of Claudia Jones and to create instead a rich archival remix that speaks to her agency and humanity. So I adopted her model of archival remixing from this project to use for Mumia, inspired by this image to the right that she created for the Claudia Jones archives. And I wanted to create something that critically fabulated Mumia beyond his life and legacy as a political prisoner and humanized him as our elder. So this is the piece that I created with Mumia's archival materials. It's entitled A Father Through Letters, and I will just play it really quickly.
Fame and icons are always obscure. That's what they do in a way. It's made me less real to a lot of people. You know, I'm a poster or a book, perhaps. I'm not a living, breathing man like every other human being. And yes, I've got a family, a loving family, but they didn't sign up for this.
So in the film Justice on Trial, Mumia's daughter described him as a father through letters. And I chose to juxtapose this audio with this photo of him incarcerated from the film. These get well cards, letters that were sent to Mumia from Miss Mumia's third grade class when he was hospitalized back in 2015. And the words "Love Mumia" that he signed in a thank you note to his campaign on Twitter, just to speak to his identity as an incredibly sentient human being beyond the implications of his iconic stature and his dehumanizing imprisonment. So though we haven't read Mumia's letters to his family, and the third graders that have wrote to him have never met him, and we may never even know who wrote this message on the window of "I love my dad," this collage critically fabulates the impossible story in its telling of him as a father behind and beyond bars. So in all, digital humanities conveys and amalgamates the historical metadata of the campaign to bring Mumia home for members to reflect on, and communities to study, and for future generations to discover. This act of technological recovery humanizes the lives of activists and political prisoners who are not traditionally included or held with archival care through the Eurocentric lens. And furthermore, instead of replicating Western spaces of preservation that museumify lived experience, we've built a space of activation through this archive that reflects our ontological frameworks of Black feminist thought and humanizes political figures like Mumia Abu-Jamal as our ancestral heritage. So because our archival materials are living things and artifacts, and they're our inheritance. So I want to acknowledge my ASW team, Dr. Willoughby Herrard, Dr. Millward, Miss Ella Turin, Ma Peru, LaShonda Carter, Dr. Fernandez, and of course, my fabulous cohort, Shemaya, Tariq, Jasmine, Domingo, and Lawanda, for just supporting me through this project and helping me to rectify all of these things in my digital humanities project. So these are some of my citations. If anyone is interested in the sources, you can email me. And yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hi, I'm sorry. I was late. I think that I'm the moderator of this panel. And so I think what we should do is go in the order that was listed on the program for our presenters, and then we'll have a Q&A. So thank you, Cienna, for going first. And I'm not sure who goes next, but one of you can step up next to the mic.
My apologies. Can you hear me? Yes, I believe I go next. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oh, not that share. Okay. So 1 second. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Lawanda Walker. I'm currently a senior international studies major with a concentration in international relations, leadership studies minor from Douglasville, Georgia, but I currently attend Hampton University, and I had the pleasure of participating in the UCI HBCU project this past summer, where we worked directly with Activist Studio West in their archive, in the building of their archive for the campaign to bring home activist and political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal. And so the title of my presentation today, really the basis of our presentation stemmed from the work I did over this past summer within the archive and some of the things that I was able to find. The title of my presentation is An Assault on the Soul, and it's a comparative analysis between both Mumia Abu-Jamal's and Angela Davis's views and theories on the prison industrial complex and what the solution could possibly be. So just jumping right in with like a quick overview of my presentation today. I first wanted to give a little bit of context on who both Angela Davis and Mumia Abu-Jamal are. I wanted to talk about the prison industrial complex, a little bit about abolition democracy and what the practice of that looks like from these two scholars themselves, and then talk about the American death culture, which is a piece that was inspired by my research that I created digitally this past summer as well. So first, jumping into my work with Activist Studio West, this is actually a piece from the archive that I previously mentioned with the campaign to bring Mumia Abu-Jamal home. This is a digital archive, so this is one of the pieces I had the pleasure of working with. And so you see that it shows Angela Davis, who is a author, who is a well-known academic and author and activist as well, and Mumia Abu-Jamal, who has been falsely imprisoned since 1982. Both of these individuals, we know that they're like political activists, and they're authors of work. And a specific journal that I'm going to pull on a little later on my presentation is the Socialist America, and they written a couple of pieces in there as well. I'm going to go to the video in which this picture was kind of inspired from. It was in the video, you'll hear a question that Angela Davis asked Mumia Abu-Jamal about how media kind of contributes to what we see as mass incarceration. And so from this video, it's a little tough to hear at times, but you'll hear her like asking the question and him giving the answers to what he thinks what he thinks leads to mass incarceration itself.
Eradicate the kind of disease that mentally poisons millions of people against Black people and brown people, and then put so much fear in people that when we look at each other, we don't see what we see. We see what's projected by the media, and I think the media plays a great role in this. And of course, the solution is not incarceration. We have the biggest prison population we need to think seriously about decarceration and the abolition of this prison industrial complex. And part of it is to educate Americans about each other in a way that we won't fear each other. We'll see each other in each other. We'll see the human and not the projection.
Yes, so in this video, you kind of heard, I apologize for the sound being a little shaky, but in the video you hear that Abu-Jamal claims that the racist rhetoric in media, yes, it contributes to mass incarceration, but it's also the idea of the prison industrial complex and its practice within our society. And then he offers up the idea of abolition as an aid in the resistance, as it will help us to see each other as humans in a more humanistic nature. And so this claim, that piece in the archive led me to the video. And then this claim in general, after watching the video, led me to a couple of guiding questions that kind of sparked my research. And so the first question is, how does the work of the two well-known political prisoners challenge the prison industrial complex? And upon hearing the recording, I began to think about what the prison industrial complex is and how it was viewed by the two. I really wanted to know what this was and get a deeper understanding or outlook on the two activists' perspectives on the prison industrial complex. I also wanted to know how does Abu-Jamal and Davis theorize about abolition democracy as a social alternative to help end mass incarceration? And so the terms prison industrial complex, or PIC, and abolition democracy, they're both mentioned in the clip, and they kind of help to frame my research over the summer. And so in order to answer these two questions that I had, I first wanted to get a deeper look, as I said, on like their views specifically. So I dove into some of the literature that they had. This book was actually one that was used primarily within our research overall at under Activist Studio West and working under the professors I had the pleasure of working with this past summer. But in this book called Writings on the Wall, it's selected prison writings from Mumia Abu-Jamal. So this is his work that he's written over the past like couple of years, decades. And in the book, he describes the prison industrial complex as a death machine that is a political tool of extinction that is so distinctly American. First, just hitting on death machine, to hear that a death machine is how he describes this practice that is so commonly done in America. It shows just the gravity of what he thinks this does like within our society. And he claims that it's a never-ending cycle of societal abuse that seems to target Black and Brown communities specifically. And so he's saying that this death machine, this tool that is being used by this tool that is so, American, so normal in America, is targeting Black and Brown communities is wrong. And it's something that we need to address as a society. And so that led me into like, okay, well, what does Angela Davis believe this is? And so in her book, Are Prisons Obsolete? Chapter 5, she writes a whole chapter on the prison industrial complex. And she defines it as a means to contest the belief that increased levels of crime are the cause of increased prison populations. In this book, she also claims that that this complex and socially acceptable theory or practice is only done because it's profitable of prisons, and that it helps with the suturing of crime and punishment. Davis is basically saying here that we don't see a climb in prison population solely because crime is increasing in neighborhoods, but because increasing the population within our prisons allows them to become more profitable. And so this cycle of abuse is easy to target certain communities than it is in others. And so in this chapter, she expounds on that, and her view of the prison industrial complex aligns definitely with Abu-Jamal's from the reading that I was able to do. And so when I look at a side-by-side interpretation of the two, it's clear that they have similar beliefs that this is a tool of modern day slavery. We hear that he's saying that it's consistently targeting a certain population, and that Angela Davis says that it's profitable. These two ideas are complex, are very familiar, and it is definitely things that contribute to what we know as the transatlantic slave trade. Or it's easy to see the parallels between the two, I'd say. And it was easy to explore both of these views on the prison industrial complex because they both agree that it's a natural progression, again, a societal tool that people of color are leaving the free world, and that it's just normal for them to be placed into incarceration. And so I found their claims to be completely plausible from the research I was able to do, because it is our reality. The US makes up 5% of the global population, but over 20% of the global prison population. And within that, the African-American population, well, really people of color in general, just take up a large percentage of that 20%. And that in itself is huge. After conducting my research, I say that the disparity is definitely disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. And so in a co-authored piece that they wrote in the Socialist Journal, they entitled Alternatives to the Present System of Capital and Justice, they were able to share about abolition democracy and what this actually looks like in its practice. And so abolition democracy, they say it fights private prisons, the profitability that is placed on prisons, and it fights capital punishment as well as the ultimate end or the ultimate punishment, that somebody's life can be taken in that way. It also champions a communal court system, education as a constitutional right rather than a human right, and that human needs always supersede property rights. And we see that through these things that they're championing or fighting, those kind of parallels between their views on what the prison industrial complex is doing in America, and how they believe that this solution can fight that. And so based on these findings, I was able to create a digital art piece. Over this summer, you'll see on the slide, I tried to highlight the 5 different aspects of the prison industrial, of abolition democracy, excuse me, that the two emphasize the most. The ending of capital punishment here, mass incarceration, of course, going down, fair court systems, that their rights are greater than property rights. And you'll see that represented by the buildings here, and then education being a right. And I have like a classroom here. And at the bottom, I have this it's kind of supposed to represent like a dream, like the ending of it. And so at the bottom, you'll see people coming together, like the dream can come to reality, like if we come together, and it begins to fade down a tad, like as the reality is coming to fruition. And I thought it would be a cool and unique way to show not only my findings, but to represent what they felt or what they believed to be right in a different way, so that people can attach what they believe to, or can relate to it in a different way as well. And so these are my sources in my bibliography. And yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lawanda. So a couple of things. One is, if this were my class, I wouldn't say this, but I'm going to say this because we are trying to simulate in virtual space a conference. And that is, those of you who can, I would like you to turn your cameras on. Because when you go to professional conferences, there is no camera to be behind. And so if you don't mind, I would like you to turn your cameras on, especially those of you who are presenting. The other thing is to remind you is that we have 4 more presentations to go. So be mindful of the time as you are moving through the process. Thank you so much. Domingo, is Domingo here? I don't see his name.
Domingo is out sick today.
Okay, Tariq, you're next.
All right, let me just share my screen. All right. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tariq Edwards. I am currently a visual studies doctoral student at UC Irvine, Claflin University alumnus, and I was a part of the Activist Studio West Summer 2021 cohort. And my project is entitled Imprisoned for a Lifetime, The Impact of Power and Influence. And so I do want to point you all to the above news clippings and images that I have placed into my presentation. These were some items that myself and my Activist Studio West cohort worked on to implement into a digital archive for the campaign to bring Mumia home, which was catalyzed by our late mentor, friend, and sister, Ella Turin. So within my research, I wanted to humanize Mumia Abu-Jamal. And my instance was looking at platform, looking at influence, and looking at just the impacts of what both of those mean. So Mumia Abu-Jamal is a political prisoner being held in jail for the wrongful conviction of murdering Daniel Faulkner. And so within the light of that, within really focusing on humanizing this man, I created this visual presentation that I'll showcase.
I join you all from the American state of mass incarceration, a state like poverty, oppression, environmental racism, police violence, and governmental repression. It is not unlike what is happening to Brother Keziah in Paris, governmental repression against dissent. Generations ago, the American Civil Rights Movement was born by the brutality, torture, and drowning death of a teenage boy, Emmett Till. Today, a global human rights movement was born by the slow motion brutality of police violence against a man in his 40s, George Floyd, who died in his 40s. George Floyd.
Today we are living through a moment where it's acceptable to paint "End Racism Now" in front of the Philadelphia Police Department's 26th District headquarters. And yet a political prisoner who has since the age of 14 dedicated his life to fighting against racism continues to be caged and lives his life on a slow death row. The Philadelphia Fraternal Order of Police has unrelentingly campaigned for Mumia's execution.
And if you know anything about how Daniel Faulkner was killed, you know that it was an execution-style killing. Mumia does not have that kind of training. Freeman, who was in the military, does. Why did the prosecution suppress that evidence at trial? Why? Let me tell you, and let us tell the DA of Philadelphia, that this is exculpatory evidence, and in any other case, this violation, which is known as a Brady violation, would immediately mean that Mumia Abu-Jamal would be released.
We join you in this day of resistance against slavery in all its forms against the Black world. And one of its greatest avatars, Frantz Fanon, who wrote and worked and lived for the wretched of the earth. For Keziah, free Keziah, from imprisoned nation, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Mumia is 66 years old. He is a grandfather. He is an elder with ailments. He is a human being that deserves to be free. Free Mumia.
My driving question was centered around influence. So I asked, what are the consequences of possessing influence? And to the right, I have another image from our archive that was actually done by Ms. Shamaya Hutchinson. And there's a flyer essentially showing just the immense amount of support and just care that people have for trying to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, but also countless other political prisoners who are being held without their justice. So in a report commentating on the film Justice on Trial, Heidi Bergerjohn stated that truth, it is not fair. Justice for all is not something that is fairly distributed to the citizens of the United States, especially if you look like me or Mumia. And as I looked into other places of research, other places of scholarship that spoke on not only Mumia's case, but countless other Black Americans who are within this corrupt system of being in jails, it really just led me to just seeing a trend in just the United States judicial system, but overall just the system that is the United States is built on. So my visual representation was heavily derived and inspired by a film entitled Medea by the LA Rebellion filmmaker Ben Caldwell. And it was an experimental collage film that was detailing the memories and lived experiences that are inherited by Black children upon birth. And I went into different articles, different documentaries, just different journals to further inform my research and further inform this concept of influence and the power that ultimately comes behind that for the positive and for the negative. So therefore, I came to the conclusion that influence is a double-edged sword. The world is still dealing with this overwhelming disease of COVID-19, and the world is still facing a reoccurring hazard of police brutality. Every time we turn on the news, every time we open social media, we are approached with the horrors of violence committed by men and women in uniform. Officers knowingly use their badge to assert, to control, and to murder. People now have no other choice but to sit in this truth that the ones sworn to protect us are the very ones causing us harm. Mumia's reach goes far and wide to people like Colin Kaepernick, who use their voice to advocate for Mumia Abu-Jamal and countless other who are being wrong, who are not done justly, who are victims of social and racial injustices. And also to as far and wide to Malaysia. There's a group of women in Malaysia that are fighting for their rights. They're fighting for their gender equality and they're fighting against this patriarchal society. Mumia Abu-Jamal says that very few people in prison have a voice that goes beyond the wall. It is my job to do the work for them because they have no one else. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a political prisoner who is being made an example of in the broad view of the public. In prison for a lifetime, or at least that's what it feels like. His time behind bars has been unjust and brought to a conclusion based upon no evidence that makes him guilty. I wanted to humanize this man because the media calls him a cop killer, a savage, and just other terrible words. And I don't want him to be identified that way because this is a man who holds so much care for the members of his community. To say that the US judicial system is flawed would be an understatement because the construction of justice in this country does not favor men or women who look like me or Mumia. Free Mumia. And here are a few of the many sources that I use to conduct my research. And if anyone would like further details or further information on those, I'll be happy to email those. And I would like to thank, first and foremost, God, my family, my friends, Dr. Millward, Dr. Wilby Herard, Ms. LaShonda Carter, of course, the late Ella Turin. I love you, my sister. I want to thank you, Cienna, Domingo, Jasmine, Lawanda, and Shamaya. And of course, I want to remind you to update your information and please donate to the conference. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Jasmine McGary, you're next. So we have Jasmine and then a video from Shamaya, and then we'll open it up for discussion and question and answer.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for showing up today. I hope all of you are doing well. I do have a pre-recorded presentation today, and I just want to take a brief moment to update my introduction because this was recorded in the summer for our UCI HBCU projects. So my name is Jasmine McGary. I am a current third year here at UC Irvine. My major is psychological science, and I also minor in African American studies. This presentation I prepared serves to be informative and allow you to understand what Mumia really means by a new death row. I also ask that you take a moment to write down my email if you would like to follow up with me for, if you have any questions. Hello, my name is Jasmine McGary. I'm a rising third-year student at the University of California, Irvine. The title of my research project is A New Death Row, Mumia Abu-Jamal, a Hepatitis Case Study. You can find my contact information below if you have any follow-up questions after today's presentations. To the left, I have an outline of my presentation for you today. To the right, I have listed driving questions that I would like you all to think about during my presentation. The first question is, if there are any treatments available for hepatitis C, are they made available to incarcerated individuals? The second question states, how will requiring medical students to learn about health disparities in the inadequate distribution of medicine to incarcerated lives impact their wellness? I would like to start off by introducing you to Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mumia is an author, activist, journalist, a founding member of the Philadelphia Black Panther Party chapter, and a father to 8 children. In 1982, he was wrongfully convicted for the murder of a Philadelphia police officer, Daniel Faulkner. Mumia was sentenced to death, but is now serving a life sentence without the death penalty. The Free Mumia campaign advocates for Mumia's quality of life while in prison and advocates for Mumia's freedom. Mumia is currently 67 years old and has been incarcerated for 39 years. He, along with many other incarcerated individuals, have faced extreme healthcare neglect. Because of this, Mumia has experienced new forms of death row. This summer, I had the opportunity to work alongside UC Irvine Humanities staff and professors, along with HBCU student scholars. Together, we created an archive of campaign flyers, photos, and documents related to the Mumia movement. The 2 images displayed are Mumia campaign flyers that I have added to the archive this summer. This flyer is promoting awareness. Hi everyone, I think I'm having technical difficulties. Not sure if anyone can hear me. My computer is frozen.
We can hear you, but
Can you hear me?
yes, your computer is frozen.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. Someone just told me that my slides weren't moving. They were supposed to move. Oh no.
That's all right. So here's what you do now. That's okay. Just regroup and tell us sort of the gist of what you wanted us to know. Because you can still move the slides, right? So you use them as a guide for you to tell us what you wanted us to know.
Okay. One moment. Could you guys still hear though?
Yes, we could hear everything you said.
It was just the visuals. Okay. If you could just give me one moment to regroup. Sorry about that. Hello, my name is Jasmine McGary. I'm a rising third
So Jasmine, because of time, you can't really start over. So you have to try to
Right.
pick it up in the middle or just give us a summary of it.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know how my camera.
It's okay. I'm just trying to figure it out. This was my first time using this platform to present. Let's see. I don't know if you guys can see my screen or if you can hear anything. No?
We can just hear you, so you have to talk us through it.
Okay.
We can see you and hear you, so you have to just talk us through it.
Okay. Let me share my screen again. All right.
We can see the slides now.
You can see the slides. Okay.
Yep.
All right, I'll start here then. So this was a flyer that I worked on while doing archival work. Just to, summarize the beginning of the project, I decided to focus in on hepatitis C. And this meaning of a new death row is that Mumia was diagnosed with hepatitis C, and he wasn't really receiving the treatment that he needed. And that there's a hepatitis C epidemic in prison. And so these prisoners, they're really having some serious health issues that are being neglected. This is a flyer that was really dedicated. It was like a weekend of resistance. It was dedicated to spreading awareness about this and trying to raise funds. As you can see here, it says this flyer promotes awareness for a multi-day event held to demand a cure for over 10,000 prisoners with the hepatitis C virus in Philadelphia in 2016. I also wanted to dive deeper into who exactly Mumia is. I included a picture of him in the corner, his daughter. Are you able to tell me how much time I have left so I don't go over time?
All right. You take about 5 to 7 minutes. I mean, frankly, all of you have gone over time. So I just wanted
Okay, no worries.
Here's the thing. You don't have to explain to us who Mumia is. Okay. Because several people have already done that. So just skip that part and tell us the meat of what you did.
Okay, well, this is my presentation serves to be informative. So I wanted to talk to you all about what hepatitis C is as well. So this is hepatitis C. It's a blood-borne viral infection that causes liver damage and inflammation. It can be transmitted from needles, syringes, non-sterile tattoo equipment, razors, and sex. So that's why this is really prevalent among the imprisoned population. I included that only 0.89% of prisoners received treatment in 2015. The treatment rate is extremely effective, but the costs are tremendously high. And the length for treatment is about 2 to 6 months, so not too long. And let's go on to the next slide so I can make time. I did have a segment from Mumia that I wanted you all to listen to. So I do want to attempt to play it. If you can't hear it, just let me know, please. Pictures of Mumia are during the time of Mumia's medical neglect. He was diagnosed with hepatitis C in 2012, and these photos were taken in 2015. Someone with hepatitis C is likely to experience jaundice, weight loss, abdominal pain, and many more symptoms. It is clear that Mumia does not appear to be healthy in these photos and is not fully present when comparing the previous photos I've shown you. Shortly, I will be playing a segment from Prison Radio so that you all can hear Mumia discuss what it's like to live with this infection.
Hep C, a new death row. When I left death row, little did I know that I was entering another, quieter, non-obvious death row. Here, I'm not speaking of Pennsylvania's draconian life sentences, what I've called slow death row. No, I mean death by medical neglect
and a malicious form of malpractice by the DOC's failure to treat the deadly liver infection, hepatitis C. At our court hearings in December 2015, we learned of the DOC's secret protocol, which explicitly refused to even consider treating any prisoner unless and until a person had esophageal varices, or in English, bleeding from one's throat. A federal judge sitting in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Robert Mariani, looked at that protocol and twice declared it unconstitutional. For lawyers, jailhouse lawyers, and especially you, members of the NLG, or National Lawyers Guild, this is your open door to bring law to the people, to save lives, not to mention help, and to make state DOC medical officials serve medical needs and not profit motives. I end on this note. Today, in Pennsylvania prisons, indeed in this very prison, prisoners are still being turned away because DOC Medical continues to apply its malicious and unconstitutional profit-driven protocol. Our work is not yet done. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Noel Hanrahan of Prison Radio.
After hearing this radio segment, I can't help but to think of all the other. Okay. So these are the methods that I use to conduct my research. As you all just heard, the segment from Mumia, I feel like was really eye-opening, and I feel very grateful to be able to listen to Mumia's radio recordings so that, we can hear firsthand what these experiences are like. And it gives us an idea of maybe what those other 10,000 prisoners are experiencing as well. So I used prison radio segments of photos, survey data, accounts from Mumia's family members, newspaper articles, and research articles, which I've included in my bibliography at the end. This is a summary of my literature. And I can provide the link to my presentation afterwards so that you all can view it. Just because we're short on time, I will send that link later on. What I really wanted to focus in on is that the health of Black incarcerated lives matter. Their conditions need awareness, advocacy, and improvement. This is my bibliography. These are my acknowledgements to my ASW cohorts, Cienna, Domingo, Lawanda, Shemaya, Tariq, and to my mentors, Dr. Millward, Dr. Olby Herard, LaShonda, and especially to Ella Turin, who is no longer with us, but special thanks to her for all of her support and love throughout this journey. And once again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I was not in any way expecting that to happen. So I will link the presentation below.
Thank you so much. Now the Shalyn, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Shaylin is going to play Shemaya's video, and then we'll talk when it's done. Are we supposed to hear something?
I apologize. Let me also share my audio if I can.
Okay.
The most marginalized voices to bring everybody along, the systematic and racial origins of sexual violence. What is sexual violence? Sexual violence can be defined as any sexual act by way of force or coercion against another person regardless of relationship to that person. What is rape culture? Rape culture can be defined as an environment where sexually violent acts against people, especially women, are excused and normalized. Rape culture is all around us and allows for disgusting behaviors to be overlooked. One may ask, what are the origins of such a culture? How did we get to a place where sexually violent acts can be excused? Mumia Abu-Jamal, an American political activist and journalist who was wrongfully convicted of murder and sentenced to death in 1982, has a clear ideology around the origins of this culture. Listen to him speak.
For the truth is, this nation was born in rape. The rape of indigenous women was considered but a spoil of war. African women were ravished aboard slave ships, clad in rags and chains. Many women leaped into the dark roiling sea, preferring death to how they were treated on board by seamen. Indeed, if the slave ships were a horror, American slave plantations were worse, for here women were raped systematically. Everywhere we turn, we find evidence of gross misogyny against women, which, while expressed in rapes, has its origins in an intense hatred and disregard of women.
Think about that. This audio comes to you from the jail cell of Mumia Abu-Jamal, a man dedicated to exposing the systematic powers that have shaped the structure of our American society. Imagine that. A wrongfully convicted black male jailed for life, while vicious predators get to serve in positions of high power due to their skin tone and gender. And let's not forget their class. The hypocrisy of America is a chilling one, but that's another topic for another day. The origins of sexual violence are massive and trace back as far as ancient Greece. Since the earliest known recording of history, the pervasive nature of sexual violence has reared its ugly head. Sexual violence is one of the most gruesome acts that can be committed, and it has been used as a tool of mass oppression to keep marginalized communities powerless. In terms of the origins of sexual violence in America, the systematic and racial implications of rape within this country cannot be ignored. The origins of sexual violence in America began in the earliest stages of its development. In the early years of America, rape was used as a tool by white colonists to annihilate native nations, specifically American Indian and Alaskan Native women. The first documented history of these attacks were performed by Christopher Columbus himself, where he was documented for his rape and torture of indigenous women. During slavery, black women were systematically raped by both white and black men as a means to force enslaved women into submission and for the financial gain of slave owners. It is impossible to know the number of enslaved women who were assaulted and raped by slave owners in the United States before the official abolishment of slavery. Before the end of the civil rights movement, white men continued to use rape as a tool to attack black women and the black community. In fact, a prominent story highlighting these gruesome behaviors is the story of Miss Reese Taylor. Miss Reese Taylor was a 24-year-old in 1944 when she was kidnapped by 6 white men while walking home from church in Alabama and gang raped in the back of a truck. Despite one of the predators confessing to this crime, the all-white jury refused to indict these men. In 2011, the Alabama state legislature officially apologized to Taylor for the lack of prosecution. Apologize? Really? Moreover, white mobs will often lynch black men on false claims of sexual violence against white women. This was largely because in the early years of America, sexual violence was considered a sexual act for whites, but for black men, it was deemed as a violent crime. One of the most known stories of these actions is the case of 14-year-old Emmett Till, a young boy brutally murdered by a white mob for no reason at all. Oh, did you think it was a reason? Well, it wasn't. As you can see, sexual violence has long been used as a weapon of mass destruction against people of color. In the words of Tarana Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, sexual violence knows no race, class, or gender, but the response to sexual violence does. The response to sexual violence is highly racialized and highly gendered. Listen to her speak.
We don't talk about other systems that are in place that allow sexual violence to flourish. Harvey Weinstein can flourish because of patriarchy and capitalism. He sits right at the intersection of those things. He's wealthy, and there are people who are more invested in his wealth than they are in the human dignity of the women that he has attacked. And that's the problem. The reality is that these were rich, powerful white women who came forward. And as a culture, as a society, we tend to respond to the vulnerability of white women first. It's one thing to take down Harvey Weinstein, and it's like whack-a-mole after a while, right? We're gonna take this one down and take that one down, as opposed to addressing privilege. There's layers to that, right? So there's white male privilege, but then there are white women who have race privilege. There's gender privilege. If you are a straight person and you know there's a queer person, a trans person who's being sexually harassed or sexually violated, we have to use our privilege in service of the folks who have less privilege. This is a social justice issue. The same way we would organize around police brutality or taxes, we can organize around ending sexual violence. Those Black and brown girls who helped me start this work are who I'm always focused on, and who are always centered, and then it moves out from there. It's the Black feminist theory, right? If you center the most marginalized voices, it brings everybody along with you.
Mumia Abu-Jamal's ideology states that this nation was born in rape, and its origins is in an intense hatred and disregard of women. Tarana Burke's philosophy states that Black women and girls are the center of the Me Too movement. She focuses on empowerment through empathy and radical community healing as a way to combat sexual violence actively. Sexual violence is a public health issue strife by systematic and racial implications that make it unbearable for people of color to survive. This should concern you. I built this work off the history of sexual violence and showed you several ways in which it has been used to assert power over others. What can you do to stop the pervasive nature of sexual violence? Respect the person's right to say no to sexual activity, educate yourself on the issues, avoid engaging in, supporting, or encouraging sexual harassment, speak out against the media's glorification of sexual violence, believe and support survivors of sexual violence. It's on all of us to stop sexual violence. Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. Here's the fun part. This is the part where we have a little discussion about the things that you have done to sort of get a sense of what you found from this beyond your presentations. And so I'm going to offer up a few points, and then I'm going to open it up for question and answer to the people who are in the audience. So let me just say that one of the things I really like about these projects is the connection between politics and digital humanities. I think there are many ways where people often see the social sciences as separate from digital humanities work, but I think that the overlap is very strong and the possibilities for that are endless, and you really show the ways in which questions about politics and policy can also be built into the way we think about archives, the way we think about digital spaces, the way we think about all of those things. And so thank you very much for doing that. Also, thank you very much, I think, for having this conversation about political prisoners. I don't think we have fully grasped yet the number of political prisoners or the number of people who have been sort of politically motivated in the ways that they have been targeted for crimes, even in the Black Lives Matter movement. So I suspect that 20 years from now, there will be people on a panel who will be talking about, here are the ways that we created political criminals, even if they don't serve as much time as a Mumia or other people like that. We will be having this conversation. And third, I think what's really good about what you have all done is that you are tapping into this conversation about rethinking the prison industrial complex in the era of defunding the police and prison and police abolition. And so you are sort of right in the zeitgeist, right in the moment that our politics is in. And so thank you so much for using your summer to really sort of drill down on that. One more thing I wanted to say. I also liked that so many of the people who we consider as political icons, right? there's a way that imprisonment has historically sort of made martyrs out of people. I mean, you can take that all the way biblical. Think about, Paul and his letters to the Corinthians. Those are essentially prison letters. But anyway, you can go back very far, but think about people like the thing that people still to this day know about Angela Davis is her trial in the 1970s, and they have those images. And the thing that Nelson Mandela talked about is how he was how the image of Nelson Mandela that was created while he was in prison, how he was trying to live up to that once he was freed. And the thing that I think is very interesting is that you really talk about what it's like to actually be a political prisoner versus what it's like to be a part of a political iconography about prisons. And those are very different things, right? That is, Nelson Mandela is busting rocks on Robben Island. We are the ones who have posters of him in our college, not y'all, because you're very young, but we are the ones who have posters of him in our college dorm rooms, right? We are the ones who, have the patches that say Free Nelson Mandela. And so what does it mean for you to have been loved by a population that essentially knows nothing about you and what your life has been like living in the process? And so I just want to thank you for that. And those are the first thoughts that I have. And I want to open it up to the people who are watching to see if they have any questions. And if not, then I will ask you more questions. So do we have any questions? Just unmute yourself.
I have comments and questions.
Right, I should say first, please introduce yourself and then.
Sure. I'm LaShonda Carter. I am one of the folks who worked with these glorious students this summer on these projects, and so excited to see them here at InCopes, because it's a family. It's meaningful to see them here. So I have a question, but I first want to thank them for their presentations. They were really great presentations. I want to give Jasmine the opportunity to give some of the statistical information that she wasn't able to give because of the tech issues that are really significant to her project. But I also wanted to ask a question, like picking up on what you just said, Dr. Price, about that disconnect between the actual experiences of incarcerated people versus the way that we articulate them in our scholarship or in the iconography and the posters on the walls, the way that we are taking up their experience. I'm thinking about that in the fact that many of the students were undergirding this desire to create recognition through humanity, through humanizing Mumia as a way to articulate him outside of that iconography. And I'm wondering how, if any of them could say a little more about how, particularly like Cienna pointed that that humanity is contingent, and that it is contingent, it is situated in a white supremacist nation and a white supremacist ideology, that it's already a flawed social category. And so when we're asking for recognition in that space, how are we complicating that request for recognition as a human in the context of what we live in? And anybody can answer that question if they want to answer that question. Thank you. I appreciate all of you.
Cienna, she said your name. Did you want to go or I can go to answer the question?
Cienna first.
So. I want to step on your toes, but
I want to, but she did say that Jasmine should read the data, so I didn't know if I should go. I can go after you, Jasmine, if you want to read your statistics first. I don't want to lose the wind from that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, LaShonda, for giving me the floor in the space to do that. And once again, sorry about the technical difficulties. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about hepatitis C. You know, what is it, treatment, severity, and its prevalence in non-institutionalized U.S. citizens versus, you know, correctional U.S. institutions. So a study showed that in 2016, Hep C showed just 1% prevalence in non-institutionalized U.S. citizens. So people who, you know, were not incarcerated, and 17% in correctional institutions. And that speaks volumes for, you know, how treatment is being distributed. And especially looking at how effective the treatment rate was, 90% effectiveness. So given that the effective rate is so high, it shouldn't be 17% prevalence in correctional institutions. And then I already did, you know, state this, but I'll state it again, that only 0.89% of incarcerated people received treatment for hepatitis C in 2015. And so I feel like it's really important to learn about what it is, how treatment is distributed, and in what ways can we advocate. So I think it's really important to learn those things so we can learn how to advocate for change in incarcerated communities.
Yes, one of the things you add, Jasmine, to the mix of very good presentations is and I think something that is not talked about nearly enough sort of in public discussions is the ways in which mass incarceration is also a public health question, right? And if nothing else, COVID has sort of brought that to the forefront, except nobody talks about what's happening. So it's funny because, not funny, but nursing homes are closed communities in this kind of the same way prisons are. But we talk a lot about the ways in which nursing homes have been hit by this, but they're more porous than prisons, which means if nursing homes have been hit like this, then prisons have been hit tremendously terrible. And it is sort of ripe for I think discussion about the ways that disease and illness can move through prison systems in ways that cause public health concerns. But yes. Keisha, you had your thing. Were you getting ready to ask a question since you were
I was.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Keisha Middlemass. I'm on faculty at Howard University in the Department of Political Science. And I just encourage all the students to take your projects and expand them. And so my question is, you look at this political prisoner and you look at digital humanities, where are the political science scholars in your work? And why I say that is I wrote a book about policies and politics of prisoner reentry called Convicted and Condemned. And there's other Black political scientists that are investigating the intersection of the prison and then what that means for families, what that means for the communities left behind, but more importantly, what that means for people coming home. And so I just encourage you to think about the political nature of beyond the political prisoners, but wanted to know what other scholars did you read outside? I know you've got your bibliographies and so forth, but what was your grounding? Was it in sociology, anthropology? Thank you. Y'all did a great job.
Unmute yourself.
I wanted to acknowledge or to answer LaShonda's question too. There's so many, I guess, tiers of information that's going on in my head. But I guess to LaShonda's question, I was thinking about all the ways that I could answer it was really as like a visual studies, like in the field of visual studies is how I would address it. In this particular moment and for our generation, I think technology has made like retrospection a lot, I would say easier, but just a lot more in our culture and in our awareness. And I think that, I mean, I was looking in particular at archival care, but for us to be able to consider Mumia's humanity is something that is just more accessible to us, I feel. Because even in thinking about like the development of film and like the accessibility of YouTube and things like that, like a behind the scenes curiosity is something that is more afforded to us, I think. So just from a visual perspective, like in the iconographic sense, like people don't really get to exist in that singularity anymore. Like it's almost expected that, you know, like even your favorite celebrity is supposed to have a get ready with me or something like that, right? So when it comes to like political prisoners and them being icons or martyrs, you just naturally know, like you think to wonder about what is the, like what are the larger implications, what are their ponderings, what does their time with their self look like you kind of get to, that's why I wanted to work in like a critical fabulation like Cydia Hartman talks about, because you really have to imagine what that life feels like. And I just think that we all have that innate ability, or the sensibility for it rather, to imagine those spaces. And so I think that's why maybe the humanity approach is there. Also obviously on a political measure, but I think just like a social curiosity is something that was bred in us just as a generation in terms of like visibility. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's kind of my thinking toward that question. And then I really appreciate your comment, Dr. Middlemass, about expanding the projects, especially toward a political consciousness, just widening that. I was thinking about how that fits so well and would just expand so much to even the piece that I created for Mumia, and thinking more about families and fatherhood and all of those things that could just be widened. So that's a really great point. And I've been interested in archival practice. I did an internship at the Library of Congress before starting this program, and then have worked on the digital archive now. So I think archival care, I would say, was more, it was really like humanities theory. I'm trying to think specifically like what field that is, because it feels a bit more, I don't know, it feels a bit more expressive than like a sociology that I feel like the Kim Gallen Humanities article is expressing. But I guess like ontologies of care and whatnot, like from a Black feminist perspective, would be like Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks, and that would be some of the genre. So I would say sociology and yeah, like gender and sexuality studies, and yeah, I guess archival studies as well.
One of the things that I would suggest, right, for those of you who are interested in what happens when you go from being this symbol of politics to being an actual person, right, to being a person, and to think about what that looks in particular for people who did not die, who are not martyred, that is people who have lived and who have left prison. There are lots of examples. There's lots of writing you can look at around Nelson Mandela and what it was like for him and the people who were on Robben Island, and the ways in which, like literal physical things like Jasmine was talking about. So not just hepatitis C, but the ways in which the dust from having the work that they were doing, like it clogged their tear ducts. And so it was like, I read somewhere that Nelson Mandela was like, he couldn't really cry well. But that's just a physical manifestation. But also think about in Philadelphia, all the people from MOVE who are being released as senior citizens, and what it means for them who have been the MOVE 8 and the MOVE 5, like there's a bunch of MOVE people, but to be all of those people who have spent their youth incarcerated and then are now being released as senior citizens with grandchildren, and what that actually means. I think that there is room for archives in what you're doing, but also I think what Keisha is trying to say is to think about how policy is shaping those ontologies, right? How the nature of legislation creates, right? So think about Mumia, and I think Lawanda talked about slow death row, right? Slow death row has a legal and political reason for why it exists, right? It's not just that Pennsylvania thought, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna just let my death row be as slow as possible. It is because of court cases that made executions more lengthy, more costly. Like there are policies that put that into place. It's not just like pencil, because I live in Texas, and in Texas, there's no such thing as a slow death row. We have a very fast death row. And in fact, Mumia would not be here probably if he was in the state of Texas, right? And the ways in which people in the political prisoners that we can still talk about are people who are in places like California, Texas, New York. They're not in Texas, Florida, Georgia, because there's no such thing as a slow death row here. And in fact, they would be martyred by now. And so I think what she's asking you to do is, as you think about things like critical fabulation, as you start to construct, what it means to be a person who is dying slowly because of hepatitis B, what is the thing that is keeping Mumia Abu-Jamal in prison, right? There is a prisoner who graduated from my alma mater, where I also work, Sundiata Akoli, who was one of the people with Assata Shakur on the New Jersey Turnpike in the 1970s. And he is still in prison, even though he has not had a disciplinary infraction in 27 years. But he also is in the early stages of dementia, which means that if he is not released now, then there's no way that he will even know at some point that he has been released. And so the question is, what about our penal system that builds like this kind of discretion into death row, into probation, and makes these things political? Who decides who gets out or not? What is the process of choosing people who are on probation panels who decide whether or not Mumia gets freed? Like there are lots, I think, ways that all of you can sort of dig into the politics behind what you're doing and still do the same thing that you're doing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? Rather than, it's important to know, because it's important for you to know sort of how they end up being sort of lingering in this process. Mumia lingers not just because people hate Black people, like that's why, but that's an emotion. What is the mechanism for that to happen, right? Critical fabulation in the ways in which Saidiya Hartman thinks about how we see people in archives, that's about perspective. What is the mechanism that then allows Mumia to be in prison for as long as he has? And that's judges, legislators, political activism on the part of aggrieved families, right? Build that into your work, and I think what it does is it makes it stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
all of you.
Yeah,
all of you.
I think that I read Professor Middlemass's question as like a really nice opportunity for me to even consider the way that I had thought about it before, so that I could understand where political theory fits in there too. Yeah,
and the thing is, it also fits very well with the digital, because there's so much you can map. There's so much you can think about. There's so many connections you can make visually, right? So I have a twin sister. That's not important to you, but she's a political scientist. So if you ever meet somebody who looked like me and be like, I was on a panel with you, it might not be me. That's the first thing. The second thing I will say is she writes about the death penalty. And one of the things that she has examined quite extensively is two cases in Texas, right? Where this white woman who was like born again in prison and becomes like, joins her prison praise dance team. And the way in which the narrative around her execution is constructed versus Shaka Sankofa, also known as Gary Graham, the way in which his, and even if you look at the kind of imagery that the press uses, the ones for this white woman, it's always her like in some kind of like prayer pose, and she has like little doilies on her head, like she's headed to communion. But Shaka Sankofa, all of the pictures that they use of him are behind glass with like a, phone next to him, behind bars. It's always him incarcerated, right? You could look at things like that and then try to understand, first of all, there's a difference in women's death row that allows them to do this kind of thing, but it still doesn't happen for Black women. So I want you to always, even as you're thinking about the images that you're choosing, like, why is it if Mumia is in his own cell, why would they take that picture with him handcuffed? Right?
Yeah.
Because he's in the belly of the prison and sick. Why does he need to be handcuffed in some of these photos? I guarantee you that part of that is the system requiring it, right?
Right.
But
It's the policies.
It's the policies that are requiring it. And understanding that actually helps you understand the images you see better, right? Understanding how healthcare systems and policies work in prison and the ways in which even like the Manson family prisoners, they were letting all of them out when they got old and sick too. And there's a way in which even releasing old and sick prisoners is a way of sort of dumping them off onto the public dole rather than caring for their costly care in prison, right? All of you have danced around all of that. You just need to pull it into the stuff that you're doing, right? Add some structure to the image, I guess is what I'm saying, some political structure to give like a little bit of a to what you're doing. I'm sorry, we might have one more question. I got all caught up in my own little discussions about what you were doing. Does anybody else have another question? I would like to end, here's how I would like to end this. I'm wondering how many of you knew Mumia before you started this program, who he was, how much you knew about him, and what have you learned about other political prisoners in this process? Let's start with Jasmine. I'm gonna ask each and every one of you.
Before I did this program, no, honestly, I did not know about Mumia. And it was really insightful being able to read his work and help Dr. Willoughby Herard prepare PowerPoint presentations over the summer. But his name was not familiar to me. I had taken just a few African-American studies courses here at UCI, but I don't recall learning about Mumia.
Before I go to Tariq, I will say, I say that because when I was in undergrad, you would see a free Mumia stickers everywhere on college campuses, all over the place. And so I'm wondering if Mumia is also a generational kind of figure. Tariq, is it Tariq or Tariq?
And please tell us what program you guys are in.
Oh, yeah. What are you doing now? Where are you going next? Give us any of that information. Jasmine, who are you? No, Jasmine has to finish now.
Well, I'm a current undergraduate student at UCI. I'm not in the graduate. Yeah, I'm not in the graduate program yet. I plan on going to nursing school actually.
Wow. We need more politically minded people in the medical profession. And that means you should be reading like Dorothy Roberts. You should be reading like Harriet Washington. So you should be reading all of these medical apartheid people. You should be reading, all of that. Because we need more nurses who also understand the things.
I agree.
Okay, Tariq.
All right. So before I entered the project, the Activist Studio West project, I had no information, no historical knowledge about Mumia Abu-Jamal. And then through the program, just learning about him as a man, learn about him and like his just tremendous reach on people, like just the words he uses. Like I just found it incredible, like just his platform of like prison radio. Like I just didn't know that was a thing that somebody, and that was incarcerated, could put out. So he was still impacting people while, being behind bars, right? So I think that's just very incredible. And so that was it helped me in terms of understanding this intersection between practical like activism and then we're doing the academic work behind it. So it really kind of charged me to adjust my scholarship to like address these issues and things that we have about how we can be activists like in practice, but also how can we look at the history behind it? How can we look at what's affecting these things contemporaneously? So it just really impacted me a lot. So I'm currently a first year visual studies PhD student at UC Irvine. And a great reason why I even, wanted to do that was because of the leadership of tremendous Black women that I was under. So that's Dr. Millward, Dr. Wilby Herard, LaShonda Carter, Ella Turan, and even my cohort. So it was with that made me want to continue this kind of work and to be at the place where they were, which was UC Irvine. So yeah, that's where I'm currently doing research.
And you're a graduate of?
I graduated from Claflin University.
That's right. You always want to say that. Cienna, how much did you know about Mumia Abu-Jamal?
Yeah. When I first learned about Mumia, I was a sophomore at Howard, I think. That was my sophomore year. And I was taking a Black aesthetics course and a hip hop course with Dr. Carr. And we did a lot of, I think I learned about Mumia through the symbolism. It was a lot of hip hop references about Steve Biko and Mumia, but I didn't know much more than or to the extent that he was a political prisoner. I didn't really know the details of where or when or how or even still. So I didn't learn that until Activist GOS, but I applied going into I was a junior that summer when I started this program for ASW. And it's funny that you ask about the generational thing, because I'm maybe it's because I was studying it at the time and maybe began to follow more people that were within this question, but I now see it all the time. I am constantly seeing people campaign for Mumia on my timeline. And I don't think that, maybe I wasn't paying attention before, but I see it so much more now. So it's nice to know that my generation is there too, because it's people that I went to school with that are retweeting these things. But yeah, I don't think I was aware of it at all until we were looking at the political tides of hip hop in the 90s. And I was like, oh, okay, who's Mumia? Why do I keep?
You just described the best part of college. Yeah. I didn't see it before, and then I took a class, and now I see it everywhere. That's
exactly.
That's the goal.
Exactly.
I want to get in there.
So yeah,
all right,
now.
Exactly. Lawanda, you get the last word, and then we're gonna be done.
Yes, and I'll be mindful of time because I know I'm hitting that 1:45 mark, at least on my coast. So, but hi everyone, again, Lawanda Walker. That's my name. I major in international studies at Hampton University. I'm a graduating senior, so this is my last semester. Yay!
Yay!
But to answer your question, did I know much about him before this project? Absolutely not. I tend to be very women-centered focused, and I will admit that is a limitation of mine. So Angela Davis, of course, loved her. She my idol. I love all of the work that she does, but I didn't know much about him until entering into this program. And the premise for me entering the program is because I was thinking about trying to attend graduate school, and I'm like, hey, let me get my foot into this. And then I step into this whole world of something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how was I missing this whole perspective, this knowledge, this outlook. It's just been eye-opening so far for me. So I didn't know about him before. Glad that I know about him now. And I definitely think that his presence, I see in my last year, I definitely see the influence of the work that I did this summer in my individual projects or assignments I've been turning in throughout the school year. So I think that's amazing as well. As far as next steps go, I want to go into graduate school. I want to get my PhD in history. I'm leaning towards more of taking a year off this year. I do have a couple of schools I'm thinking about going to, but I'm thinking about taking a year off for the following semester and just going back in fall 23. I don't know if you can tell by how fast I talk, but I just tend to be on the go, and I think I just want to take a break.
This, LaShonda, is not the place to do this, but I want you to have a plan for what you're going to do with that year. Right.
Yes.
So don't just take that year off and then find yourself 6 months later having to pay off your student loans sitting in your parents' your old bedroom.
And
really
that taps into my plan.
What you're going to do. I'm a full supporter of purposeful years off, not sort of just I'm sick of school, so I'm just gonna work at the Cheesecake Factory. Because
not that. No.
I don't have a problem with that, but I've known people personally who have taken that year off. And then 6 months later, when those student loans are due, they are like, what? So I just want you to really, all of you, to think about gap years unless you come from an independently wealthy family, and gap years are something
Well,
that
no, the wealth is definitely not there. Hoping for the future, definitely manifesting that. But for my year off, I like to do public history. I like writing stories, like centering like different marginalized communities. I've been jumping from like museum to museum throughout my tenure at Hampton. And so this past semester, I've been working at the United States Golf Association's library and museum. I've been doing a research project with them where I'm looking at like a Black women golfer specifically, from starting back like to Reconstruction all the way up until now. So I'm working with like Althea Gibson, Mariah Stackhouse, like different names that you may kind of know, but you don't really know. And so my primary research has been like building individual like projects and profiles and archives on them, and then like doing different social media pieces for Women's History Month, actually. And at the end, I plan to write an article. So it's not like I'm just going to be doing anything. I want to continue in like museum, like studies, public history, and that kind of thing. But I do intend on pursuing a PhD. I just think I need to
also, those of you who are Black college graduates, the Blacksonian has a specific 2-year post baccalaureate degree program for HBCU students. Did you know that?
See that?
I did. Yes.
Well,
so you should think about
they said it was
for
for people who have like a bunch of experience. I have like.
You sound like you have a bunch. Miss, I'm into golf. I'm doing golf work. You sound like you have. Look, don't undersell yourself, and women tend to do that a lot. So I would encourage you to apply. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are now officially over time. Thank you so much for your work and for your continued ways of incorporating this into the ways that you're understanding new information, and have a good day. See y'all.
Thank you.